Okay, moving on to the next team in the ACC that we will be going over today. This is going to be the team, that I've projected to come in 13th place in the league, and that would be Jeff Caple and his Pittsburgh Panthers. And Jeff Caple is going to be entering his third year as the head coach of the Pitt Panthers, and I feel like this is going to be a pretty decent year for Pitt. I feel like it's going to be a season where, even though I don't really expect them to win that many games, I do feel like there is some optimism around this Pitt team, and that is not something Pitt Panther fans have said a lot over the last couple of years, really since Jamie Dixon went to TCU. But Pitt does bring back a decent amount of talent that they returned from last year's squad. You'll start off with Xavier Johnson, the 6'3 junior, and I'm not going to say he was bad last year, but I'll admit he was a little disappointing, averaging 11.7 points per game, 3.7 rebounds per game, 4.9 assists per game, and 1.8 steals per game. And Xavier Johnson, I feel like you could describe his sophomore season in a couple ways because it was disappointing relative to the expectations. His shooting percentages dropped and his assist to turnover numbers stayed mostly the same, something one would expect to improve with more experience. Both of his shaky finishing and his questionable decision-making led him ranking in just the 28th percentile nationally in pick-and-roll ball handling, and that was a large chunk of Pitt's offense that really wasn't available last year, and I feel like this year, the freshman Femi Udukale, who broke his arm in a car accident, hopefully he will be okay and ready to go. I feel like those two guys, along with Etl Horton, the Delaware transfer, are really going to be the guys that makes a significant impact in this Pitt backcourt. You know, a lot of people have asked me, Zach, what do you think about the Xavier Johnson and Etl Horton backcourt, especially because last year, if you remember, I was actually pretty high on the other Pitt guard, Trey McGowan's, and if you remember, him and Xavier Johnson, I just don't really think their chemistry ever really developed and matched up that well. So if you remember, what ended up happening was McGowan's ended up transferring to the University of Nebraska, where he is going to be their starting point guard right now. And then this year, Xavier Johnson, I think he's going to be that point guard and just ball dominant guard. But now Jeff Caple brings in Etl Horton, who I think is a crucial piece. He's a guy that shot 41% from three in 2018-19, and he instantly becomes the best Panther perimeter threat. This Pitt team was okay shooting the ball last year, but they've led opponents to play zone against them 26.1% of the time. And then here's the other thing, there is a little bit of reason for optimism with this Pitt team. Their front court isn't bad. The 3-4 combo of Audice Toney and Justin Champagnie, I think, is going to need to find a way to strike fear into opposing defenses, and I feel like they could do that. I remember watching Pitt last year in the ACC tournament before it obviously got shut down, and they had a first-round game against Wake Forest, and I just remember Olivier Sarr balling out in that game, so for any Kentucky fans listening, but also Justin Champagnie, I thought, was the best player on the floor for Pitt in that game, and he was really productive. He really gave me a lot of optimism when I went into this Pitt team, and I feel like Jeff Caple's an okay coach, and I do think this Pitt team, their goal for this season should be to be as good or just as good as the previous Pitt teams under Jeff Caple's regime, because I think we could all agree, right? This Pitt team, if they somehow, some way could make the NCAA tournament, especially when they are playing in this ACC, I believe that would be considered to be a big-time success for this Pitt Panther basketball team, and they bring back more returning talent than you would think. Another guy they bring back is Kareem Koulibaly, who was pretty good in limited playing time last year, and then also Terrell Brown. He was part-time starting center last year. He contributed a little bit, but Pitt does have some experience in this front court. They also bring in John Hughley, a top 100 recruit and a true center who could score one-on-one in the post via great positioning and strong footwork. The post has not been a part of Caple's system so far, but he also hasn't had anyone worth dumping the ball into. With more of a meal ticket on the block, perhaps Pitt can boost its efficiencies by throwing different looks at defenses. And I feel like the bottom line with this Pitt team is this. I don't think last year's Pitt team was bad. I feel like it was a little disappointing when you consider the expectations, especially more specifically when you look at specific players in specific roles like Xavier Johnson and Trey McGowan's, who ended up transferring to the University of Nebraska. Nebraska. But I think Jeff Caple needs to show this season that this Pitt team is making some progress. And I do think there is some talent on this team that could help him do that. Not many teams in college basketball are going to have a player as good and as experienced as Xavier Johnson. I like how he built this roster, bringing in a shooter in Etl Horton to play alongside with him, bringing back some returning experience in Champagny and in Tony. So I think if you're a Pitt fan from that perspective, you have to look at it, pretty exciting. But at the same time, if Pitt doesn't improve this year, I'm not really sure where they go from here. I think Justin Champagny looks like a rising star, but Jeff Caple's fate is intertwined with that of his point guard, Xavier Johnson. I feel like if Xavier Johnson improves, Pitt will likely follow, and he could be a guy that could really break out and kind of, make college basketball fans just remember how exactly good of a player he is, because he was underwhelming last year. Let's be honest. I question the true height of Pitt's ceiling, but battling in the middle of the ACC pack is pretty reasonable, and I feel like if you're a Pitt fan, once again, that would just be my expectations for the season, and that would be kind of my barometer of whether this season should be considered a success or not. I understand the ACC is going to be very competitive, but somehow, some way, if you're a Pitt Panther fan, you're just going to need to see your team be competitive and fight and just show some improvement, because over the last couple of years, Jeff, I don't want to say Jeff Caple's done a bad job, but he's entering year 3. It's now the time when, you look at the Pitt Panthers, and these are going to be the guys that the players that Jeff Caple is going to be bringing in and playing for this Pitt Panther team were the same guys that he recruited and the same guys that he picked to be on his team. So now the transition kind of follows suit. I think we all kind of knew that Kevin Stallings was never going to be a good hire at Pitt, and that hire really set their program back for a while. But at the same time, I do think Jeff Caple has done a pretty good job considering the circumstances of what exactly this program was looking like when he left. So from that perspective, I do think that Pitt, should hopefully be competitive this season. They do bring in a lot of new guys with a lot of returning talent, and not many other teams in college basketball are going to have a backcourt with Xavier Johnson, a really good, consistent scorer and passer, with the shooting of Etl Horton, and length with Champagny and Tony, 2 other guys returning as well. So if I'm a Pitt fan, I kind of hope my team uses that talent to just kind of keep building momentum and hopefully be right in the middle of that ACC race. I feel like if you could somehow sneak your way onto the bubble, that's really what I would consider to be a successful season for the Pitt Panthers.